Let's start off with where you're from and what early childhood was like for you.
Well, that's kind of a dark story. You want to start there? All right. So I'm originally from Providence, Rhode Island. And like I said, my childhood is very, very dark. I suffered an enormous amount of sexual abuse, an enormous amount of physical abuse, an enormous amount of psychological abuse. I often tell the story or relay the story that, at a very young age, I was locked in a box for 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 days at a time. Or I wasn't fed, I wasn't given any water, and I'd literally come out covered in my own urine and my own feces. And so my earliest childhood memories of my mother sticking me in a corner with a feces-covered diaper in my face at 2 years old to teach me, to potty train me. And, she, as a child, I reached up to touch a stove and in a screaming rage, she told me, you wanna feel what it's like to be burned? And she poured a pot of boiling water down my back. And, my back is all scarred up and I've got it tattooed. And that's not even the worst part, right? The worst part is, at a very young age, the programming. What I mean by that is we develop our personalities at a very young age. And I know this now, didn't know this then. She would say things to me like, you're nothing, you're useless, nobody's ever gonna love you. I should have had that abortion. I wish you were dead. You're just like your father, and I wish he was dead too. No, you're never gonna be anything, nobody's ever gonna love you. Why do you even exist? These are the things that were put in my head at a very young age. One of the things that I like to state categorically and definitively is none of that stuff made me an alcoholic. But I'm of the belief system that alcohol and drugs saved my life. I got high the first time at a very young age, 6, 7, maybe 8 years old. And what happened for me with the drugs and the alcohol was those voices in my head stopped. Like, it numbed the pain to make life bearable, because life was unbearable to me. I believed the things that I was told. I believed the things that I was programmed. And by the time I was like 7, 8 years old, I was literally stealing old ladies' purses to get high. I had a friend that was older than me, had a mini bike, and I would ride on the back of the mini bike. And on the 1st and the 15th, Narragansett Boulevard in Providence, Rhode Island, there was an Almax, and I would steal old ladies' purses to buy drugs, to numb the pain. And again, none of that makes me an alcoholic or a drug addict. What it does is it's a breeding ground. And at some point in my life, I crossed that imaginary line that, alcoholics and drug addicts talk about, where the alcohol and the drugs were no longer my solution, but they were the problem and my master. And it was downhill from there, I don't remember a lot of normal childhood. I didn't have a lot of normal childhood. I grew up in the streets. I grew up in the street corners, idolizing the people with money, the drug dealers, the guys with the nice cars and all of that stuff. Time I was 10, 11 years old, I'm breaking into factories. Providence is the costume jewelry capital of the world. So they have these vats where they use for gold plating. And you could, once it cools down, you can actually steal the gold out of these things. And it never made sense to me to go and have a job when I could be, make $300, $400 a night working with these kids to break into factories. So I was a bad egg from the beginning. I was programmed to be a bad egg.
Did you have any siblings growing up?
Yeah, lots of them. And there was 2 of my older brothers were dead and were killed by the time I was, 10, 11 years old, but there was 8 in total. And that was another issue in the household. My father was an absolute raging alcoholic. And he got my mother pregnant because he was on his way to Korea. Or Vietnam, I'm sorry. He was on his way to Vietnam, and he had served in the Korean War. And so we got my mother pregnant, or so we thought. It turns out later on in life that he was not my biological father, but that's another story altogether. But he believed he was. Mm-hmm. So we got my mother pregnant so that she could take care of his other kids from his first wife that, for all of my life, I heard about how much he loved her and hated my mother. And so she could take care of him while he was off in Vietnam. So yeah, there was 6 by the time it was all said and done after my brothers were killed.
Were you going to school? Were you?
That's an interesting question.
Because you're a smart guy.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
You're very educated.
Well, yeah, there was a time in my life where I had a lot of time to educate myself. And so the full reality is yes and no. I got a GED. I ended up later on in life going and getting some BS degrees, having absolutely nothing to do with anything I do. But school was not much of anything except for a place for me to sell drugs. So yeah, I went, but for the wrong reasons. And it's funny because, I tested very high. I have a very high IQ. They put me in model programs. They tried to get me in special schools. I just wasn't interested. And by the time I was 17 years old, I was making more money than I knew to do with. So,
and that was from selling drugs.
Selling drugs, and that parlayed me into a car dealership. I actually owned a crooked car dealership in the state of Rhode Island.
Wait, so you you sold enough drugs, made enough money to start a car dealership, a crooked car dealership.
Correct.
And was it a thriving business?
Oh gosh, yeah. So you understand, by the time I was 17 years old, so let me back you up. So mother gets remarried at some point, mother and father divorce, whatever happens, and I got a very abusive stepfather, and the abuse just continued. And my last memory of my interaction with him, he's literally standing on my back. My head's in the cellar door, and he's slamming the cellar door on my head and telling me that, the same things I've been hearing all my life. And you can only kick a dog for so long. And that day I snapped. I was just 14 years old. And I got up and I had enough. And I picked this guy up and threw him out a second-story window. We got into a physical altercation, and I ended up on top of him, and I'm beating him to a pulp. And so my mother runs and grabs the neighbor, and this guy comes back and put guns to my head. And my mother looks at me, and the woman that was supposed to protect me and take care of me chose that man over me and told me to get out of her life and get out of their house. And so off I went. And so I ended up in New York City and doing a lot of things I'm not supposed to be doing, trying to stay out of shelters. Living behind a dumpster, literally, because when you go in the shelters, they're brutal there as a kid. And I ended up getting stabbed and jumped and stabbed, robbed. And I'm lying behind a dumpster at 14 years old, bleeding to death. And a prostitute literally saved my life. An angel saved my life. And that put me on this weird track that ended me up back in Rhode Island, back involved with guys with a lot of vowels in their last name. And by the time I was 17 years old, I was involved with some pretty heavy drug trafficking and doing some things because I was absolutely insane. I would do anything that these guys asked me to do. I remember by the time I was just shy of 18 years old, I had a drop ceiling in my apartment. I had $250,000 in cash in that drop ceiling. I was doing amazing. I was making $15,000, $20,000 a week doing what I was doing.
And this is 40 years ago.
Hey guys, quick update. Every Monday night, I host the Rise Above Recovery meeting. It's an open meeting for any addiction, alcohol, drugs, gambling, food, whatever you're struggling with, you're welcome here. To get the meeting link and weekly updates, just email me at kevin@riseabovepod.com and I'll add you to the list. Also, if this podcast has helped you, please like, subscribe, or leave a rating. It helps us continue to spread the message of hope. Lastly, if you'd like to go even deeper with Rise Above, check out our Patreon. Supporters get access to live interviews and can chat with guests after the interview. Thank you.
So I took that little bit of money and I got involved in this car dealership. And the thing back then was in New England, cars in Rhode Island have what's called salvage titles. So the car gets in an accident, they stamp the salvage, blah, 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 blah. Well, that wasn't the case in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts didn't stamp titles as salvage. So I had these guys that I got involved with, and they had written a check to one of the auctions, the auto auctions in Massachusetts, and the check bounced, and they needed like $35,000 tomorrow, or they were going to, they're going to issue warrants of arrest, and they just happened to know that I had a few dollars, and so this kid's name was Chris, too, as well, and he came to me and said, "Hey, man, if you take care of this, we'll give you a third of the dealership." And I was like, all right. And so I gave $35,000 in cash to these guys, and they got the check situation straightened out. And I became involved in the dealership. And the scam there was this. Massachusetts didn't stamp their title salvage. So what would happen would be that the guys in Rhode Island would go steal. Remember IROC Z28s?
Of course.
The Regal Grand Nationals and all of those 80 era cars.
Mm-hmm.
So they would go steal a car, and then they'd hide the car, and they'd come to us and say, okay, I need a title for a yellow IROC Z28 with T-tops and yada, yada, yada. Go get it for me. So we'd go to Massachusetts and we'd buy a crushed, a total destroyed, burnt out car for $1,000. And then we'd sell these guys the car and the title for $15,000 or $10,000. And they'd drill out the tags, put them on the stolen car, and they had a clean title from the state of Massachusetts, and they'd go run it through. So now we didn't do anything illegal, but it was pretty shady. So I was making a ton of money. And in that process of making that kind of money, big shotism and egotism and all of that stuff was big in my life. And I found crack cocaine. And shortly thereafter, within a year, I was down the tubes.
So you lost it all once you started
Gave
smoking
it away.
crack.
I didn't lose it. I gave it away.
Okay.
Gave it away to the addiction. Yeah.
Okay. What is it like? What was the high like smoking crack?
It's so funny because this is a fine line that crackheads use. Well, I never actually smoked crack. I freebased my own cocaine. I never bought crack off the street. So, and it's funny that they say that because my story is so much like that. I'll never forget, we had like an 8-ball of Coke, and I used to snort Coke all the time. It was no big deal. You get high, but it was nothing. And I remember I was sitting with this girl, and her uncle was a big wig in the New York mob, in the Northeast mob scene. And we're sitting, and she's cooking this Coke, and I'm smoking it, and nothing's happening. And so we go to a friend of hers house, and he's like, yeah, you're doing it wrong. And he cooks it right. And I took a hit of that he had cooked, like I had been taking the hits of stuff she had cooked. And the best way to describe it is a helicopter landed on my head and carried me away. And I never wanted to come back. It was an absolutely amazing feeling of, I can't even, it was euphoric. And I pursued that because the thoughts stop, the brain goes numb, the physical feeling of being high on crack cocaine is, as a human being, the endorphin rush is higher than that of sexual intercourse. So there's no comparison. It was just absolute euphoria. And that's where it started. That's not where it ended.
So was that 18 when you picked up crack?
Yeah, right around 17, 18 years old. Yeah.
Okay, so then we do the math here. You don't get sober until 20. So that's 2.5 years, almost 3 years.
Every day.
Walk us through the progression. And
So at some point, I progressed extremely fast. Like I went through all my cash. All I did was life was getting high. There was nothing else. I'm diehard that way. I was in 150%. All I did was getting high. That first hit that I actually successfully got high with was probably the only euphoric hit I ever had. From there, it progresses to if you smoke like I smoked. Like I didn't smoke Little Rocks. I smoked. And so paranoia, schizophrenia, not sleeping for days. You smoke you hit a hit, and then you're at the peephole on the door, looking out the windows. That was me all along. So, and it's so funny because when I got high, all I wanted to do was come down, and when I came down, all I wanted to do was get high. It was absolute insanity. And sometime around, I had to have been about 17 when I got really bad, because right around 18. The guys that I was working for running the drugs, they no longer trusted me. I ended up getting arrested. They caught me with like 36 kilos of cocaine, a whole bunch of stuff. And they made all that stuff go away from me. But they put me in rehab. And in rehab, I found my solution. I really did. I've been sober for a long, long time. And I found a solution in that first rehab. She was absolutely amazing. She was about 5'7", 130 pounds, olive skin, long brown hair. She was absolutely gorgeous. She was on the U.S. Olympic dive team, and she was on the U.S. Olympic ice skating team. She was an alcoholic, not a drug addict, and she was going to fix me. And we came up with this beautiful plan in rehab. And the place where they sent me to rehab was in Connecticut, man. It was beautiful. These guys spent like $100,000 for me to be there. And this is back in like the 80s. They spent $100,000 for me to be there for a month. And I was in there with a governor's daughter, a rock star's son, like all those kind of people. And here I am, crackhead, missing a tooth, that kind of thing. I found that solution there. And And we had a beautiful plan, right? She was an alcoholic, and I hated alcoholics because my father was a raging alcoholic. He used to come home at night, blame me for being married to his mom while I was sound asleep, just punch me in my head. And so I hated alcoholics. And so she had never seen drugs, saw what it was doing to society, and she was never going to do cocaine. So we had the plan. She was going to keep me from getting high. I was going to keep her from drinking, and it was beautiful. And I'm here to tell you, Kevin, it absolutely worked. It was an amazing plan that it absolutely worked. And then on the 8th day, we were both sitting in a hotel room doing shots, smoking crack, right? But it's so funny because we were so different. Like I went to her house the first time, and this is in Rhode Island. It's not West Palm Beach. There was a butler, a Bentley, a porte-cochere, big house, you know. And here I am, a kid from the streets, missing a tooth, and her dad looked at me like, no. This is not happening. You know, we ran away a week later. And it's funny because, she was an amazing human being. I'm a full ride scholarship to Tufts University, absolutely brilliant. I did comedy for a while in Orlando when we absconded to Florida because of the guys that had put me in rehab. They were after me because I wasn't sober anymore. So we fled to Florida. And she would write my comedy routines, and I was doing stand-up comedy at Bonkers in Orlando on 441. And yeah, so we ended up in Florida, and since I'm the king of great decisions, she ended up getting pregnant, and she got pregnant, and I ended up marrying her. And here's the amazing thing. I'm not 100% convinced that I had crossed that line yet, as insane as that sounds. Sorry. As insane as that sounds, because I was able to quit. When I found out that she was pregnant, I stopped everything. And I replaced the drugs with work. And I got a lot of stories along the way. I'm kind of giving the abbreviated version. All right. So I started working for TGI Fridays, and I got dropped into a store as I started the front door, worked my way up as a waiter and then a field trainer. And so she's pregnant. I'm going to buy a house, and I'll never forget, we're looking around at houses, and it was a new subdivision in Lake Buena Vista, and they kept saying to me, well, how are you going to pay for the house? You get financing? I'm like, no, I'm going to pay cash. No, I'm going to pay cash. No, I'm going to pay cash. Like, okay, whatever. So I'm working at TGI Fridays, and I'm literally working 80, 100 hours a week as a waiter, and I'm making a killing. This TGI Fridays, they predicted to do like $2.5 million a month maybe, or whatever it was, and it was doing like $2 million a week. The guy that was the manager, or managing partner as they called him back then, his first bonus check the first year was $13 million. That's how well the store did in Disney Village up in Orlando. So I was making a killing. I was probably made $250,000 that year, 3/4 of it in cash. So that's what I was doing. And so I'll never forget, I showed up to buy that $135,000 house, and at closing, and I showed up with a duffel bag, a duffel bag. And I put it down on the table, and they were like, what is that? And I'm like, it's cash. And they were like, what are you talking about? I said, I've been telling you for 3 months, I'm paying cash for this house. Yeah. There's the cash. They were like, no, cash does not mean cash. It means you wire money in an account. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do with this? Anyways, that's how insane I was, right? Mm-hmm. I'm 18, maybe 19 years old, and I buy this house and for my son, and who wasn't born yet. And so, long story short, I had quit drugs. I didn't know she had not. So there was some complications in my son's birth. He was born premature. He was then ended up in neonatal ICU as a result of his lungs not fully developed. But he decided he was coming out. And so he was there for 40 days, 30 days, somewhere around there. And they sent us home. And my son required a lot of special treatment. You had to pat him on the back every 20 minutes when he was sleeping to keep his lungs working and all this stuff. And so she was a primary caregiver, and I was off working. And I'll never forget, one day I was working, I usually work doubles, but I worked a split double, which means I had some time off in the middle. So it was November 17th, 1989. I came home between my shifts, and we had a 2-story house with a garage down below, and I opened the garage and walked in the house, and my house was really weirdly silent. and my house was never quiet. You don't get a baby. And I'll never forget, I'm walking around and calling out to my wife and no response. And for some reason, I'm calling out to my son, and I don't know why. But I walked upstairs and I walked to the nursery, and my son was in the bassinet alone. My wife was nowhere to be found. And I walked over to him, and he was not cold, but he was cool. And so I grabbed him up, and I'm performing CPR, and I got him to the hospital, and he died that day. And my wife was nowhere to be found. And so I couldn't call. I could call in the house. This was, back in the day before cell phones. And I ended up coming home and pounding on my neighbor's door. And I'm like, dude, have you seen Michelle? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what do you mean, yeah? Where is she? He goes, I'm like, dude, where's Michelle? And he said, she's I saw her down at JoJo's house earlier. And I'm like, that coke dealer? He goes, yeah. I'm like, man, we don't do drugs anymore. And he goes, that's where I saw her. And so I went back to my house, and I had a 9mm upstairs, and I grabbed the gun, and I went down the road, and I opened the door. I went inside, and I heard my wife making noises that she should not have been making without me being present. And I walked up, and I walked into the bedroom, and I was so enraged because she was there with him. As a result of that, my son was dead. There was coke all over the place. And I literally took that 9mm and I put it in the drug dealer's mouth, and I pulled the trigger. And the gun jammed. And I stepped back and racked the second round, pointed at his head, and pulled the trigger again. And the gun jammed. I then took the gun and I beat the crap out of the guy with it. I mean, I all but killed him. And when I was done, blood everywhere, I took the gun and I threw it at him. And when I threw it at him, it hit the wall behind him. And the gun discharged and shot over my head. So God was present in that moment, keeping me from killing that guy. And that's the first time in my life that I recognized that God was there, keep me from making a decision that would have permanently altered my life. And I left there that day, and I didn't take a sober breath for 2 years. I couldn't deal with the pain. When you start using drugs and alcohol the way I did at 6 and 7 years old, that's where you stop developing emotionally. So I was a 6 or 7 year old kid, and nobody to help me. And so all I could do was numb the pain. And in that length of time, I did a lot of undescribable things, caused a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, tornado through life. And yeah. Until I finally ended up with somebody having the courage to love me enough.
I'm so sorry for your loss, Chris.
Thank you.
So you're in Florida at this point.
Yeah, I left Florida.
Oh, you did
2
leave
years in
Florida?
Rhode Island.
Okay. So you went back for your last 2 years essentially of using in Rhode Island, back to the old neighborhood?
Back to the old neighborhood, old people, old tricks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So can you take us through your last month of using and how you found recovery?
My last month of using, it was homelessness. It was doing a lot of stuff. And I actually didn't find recovery in Rhode Island, right? So things got too hot for me. Literally, people were looking for me everywhere. I owed everybody money. I was ripping everybody off. So I fled to Michigan, where my father was, who had found AA. He found some sort of recovery, and I really had no options. So I ended up in Michigan, and Michigan is where I found recovery, because where I ended up in Michigan is it was a professional town, Dow Chemical, Dow Corning, Midland, Michigan. Not the kind of thing that I'm used to by any means. And so that's where I found recovery, and found recovery for all the wrong reasons. But I found it nonetheless. There was somebody introduced in my life that had the courage to love me, and it was this old dude, and he was crippled up, and of course I was a smart ass kid that had all the answers, you know. But he had the courage to stand up to me, and the reason he did is because I think that he knew that I knew there was no cool points beating up an 80-year-old guy that was all crippled up, right? So Larry was the man that reached his hand out to me that pretty much saved my life, because he did, in fact, give a crap about me. And I don't know why I suffered his abuse. Like, I allowed him to abuse me. You know, and when I say that, I mean, like, you know, he just would make fun of me. And I found out when I was 5 years sober that those guys used to keep me around just to remind themselves of how insane people can be when they So I was doing as much for them as they were doing for me, which is pretty funny.
They kept you around for good reasons.
Yeah,
I mean, you benefited from it as well. So
100%.
You didn't go away this time. You went right into meetings in Michigan.
Correct.
And it's funny, I'd been away so many times.
Yeah.
This last time I got sober, I just went crawling back into a 12-step program, and it just, the pain was great enough.
Yeah.
I had been through so much shit. I tried the program every which way. I would get a sponsor. I wouldn't go to meetings. I'd go to meetings, not get a sponsor. I would not listen to all the suggestions. I would take just the suggestions that made me look cool, whatever it was. And then I just kept hitting my head against the wall, and I kept trying to do it my way. And it was when, you know, you just brought up how, you know, you wouldn't let anyone, you know, make fun of you, but like in this situation, I mean, I had the same situation when I first started coming around. I was more of like the grunt of the group and like the runt of the group. And I was okay with it because they were helping me stay sober. It didn't even matter at that point because I was so beaten up and I was willing to do whatever anyone said who had some sobriety time. Mm-hmm. What would you do? What did you do your first 90 days to help keep you sober?
That's so funny. I knew that the guys that I hung out with wouldn't allow me to hang out with them if I didn't stay sober, right? So that's the only thing, right?
Yeah.
And you gotta understand that as a crackhead, you like burn all the bridges.
Yeah.
You burn all the bridges. And so these were the only people that wanted me hanging out. And if I didn't stay sober, they wouldn't hang out with me. So then I would be left to my own devices, and this thing is a dark, scary place to be, for sure.
Did you, were you in a 12-step program? Is that how you met him?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Did you start working on yourself immediately?
I didn't start working on myself till I was probably 4 years sober.
Okay.
Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I was just so broken, and the crackhead mentality is you're constantly running, constantly buzzing, you know, can't sit still, can't do peace. So it took me a long time to even get to the point where I could be in a position to even do any of that, you know? So it took a long time to get me there. And I had a lot of really negative experiences, and these guys talked about God a lot and all of that stuff. And God wasn't for me, right? So there are several reasons. First is, you know, I often wrestled and struggled with the idea is how could God allow that child to have all those things happen to him, right? And then secondarily, when I was dying, you know, after I lost my son, I was dying. I was killing myself with drugs and alcohol. I walked into a church, and I'll never forget this. I walked into the church, and it was a non-denominational church, so this is not against any religion. And I walked in and told the lady what was going on in my life, that, you know, I was dying. I couldn't stop. They were like, "We got you. You're good. Come and sit in this room. We're going to call a minister. He's going to come talk to you." So it's so funny because even reflecting back, I just think about this. He was huge, this guy. And this little, you know, this little mini coming with like a little siren on top and, you know, driving, getting to the church on time and coming to rescue, And he comes walking in, this big guy his name was Jim. And he comes and he sits down and he's talking to me and he's listening. I'm telling him what's going on. And he says, yeah, great. He said, I got a question for you. And I'm like, well, what's the question? And he said, do you believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? And I looked at him and said, I don't know. And he said, then we really can't help you. And they escorted me out of the church. So that's where I was with God and religion. And these guys, that's all they talked about was they got sober through a higher power, God, spiritual intervention, spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't having none of that. And so what I can sit here today and tell you, as insane as that sounds, and you haven't even, right, my story even gets worse when I got sober, my story even gets worse. That everything that happened to me, I 100% consider a blessing, including losing my child. Mm. And the reason that it's a blessing is God has positioned me, and yes, I believe strongly in God. My whole life is based around my spiritual connection and my faith. God has positioned me in a place that I can help people that other people cannot. Mm. I can look at people that have suffered the sexual and physical abuse that I've suffered and say, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't you. You are worthwhile. And God can and will use you if you allow him to. And it's a blessing that I was able to go through the pain of losing a child and sit here and look you in the eyes as a grown man and say, I am useful and whole, is a blessing. Like, God allows me to touch people's lives that in ways that I never could have imagined. And like I said, you know, I've been through worse stuff in sobriety than even before sobriety. You know, I was 3 years sober, and I finally found life, man. I found an amazing woman that loved me to death. And we had 2 beautiful children. And we built a life together. I had a chain of computer stores. I had a Radio Shack franchise up in Michigan. And everything was perfect. And on March 17th, 1996, my girl came to me and said, hey, can you take the kids to daycare? I want to go get a yoga class. And I grabbed her and said, baby, I can't. I got people to meet me at the store. Is there any way you can do it? She's like, yeah, I got this. No worry. And she told me she loved me, kissed me on my cheek. I kissed my kids. And she left that morning. And a 24-year-old kid with 2 previous drunk driving convictions came through a traffic light. And at 10:41 in the morning, on March 7th, 1996, killed my family.
Oh my
God. And as painful as that is, I stayed sober through it. I didn't drink and I didn't drug. And that old man's sponsorship family, the people that he hung out with, they always talked about God. They were like 60, 70, 80 years old. Those guys didn't leave my side for 3 months. I mean, I had to deal with a lot of counseling and a lot of grief therapy and a lot of pain. But I didn't drink and I didn't drug. And so I rested on the fact that God gave me the strength to get through that so that I could help other people get through that. Thanks, man. Sorry. So even in sobriety, God has used me because I can bear that kind of pain. So I share that story often in rehabs and detox centers where I go to a lot, you know, at least 2 or 3 times a week. And I tell people, if you come up with a good enough reason to get sober, get drunk, I'll come and buy the first round for the both of us. Because if you can stay sober through that, is there nothing you can say you can't get through? And that's literally where I am. So, you know, that in recovery is a powerful tool that allows me to affect people's lives. God, again, has positioned me in a place where I'm useful and whole. And, I'm blessed enough to be able to turn that negativity into something that's very positive. And I like to think, I know, because people tell me that I've affected their lives. There's a guy that, calls me every now and then. He had 28 years sober when I met him, and he was going through some struggles. And I shared that story in openly in an appropriate setting to do that. And he called me a week later and said, I was thinking about going out and using. I was some stupid, petty shit. And he said, and the story was just in my head. And I couldn't do it. And, he calls me every now and then. So when that kind of thing happens, I know that my life has come full circle, and I'm useful and I'm whole, and God uses me a lot. And I get to watch it, dude. Kevin, I get to watch people's lives be affected by the things that God's doing through me. And that's beautiful and amazing. Beautiful and amazing.
You had said that you had a lot of trouble with God in the beginning.
Correct.
And this had happened at 3 years sober. I am so sorry for your loss. Did you start to believe, because you were able to stay sober through that? I mean, that is the worst pain that anyone, I've never been through it, but that I can even think of, losing your family in the matter of minutes. And then the situation, you were asked to drive. Like, I couldn't imagine. You stayed sober through that. Obviously that's a horrible thing that happened, but were you able to still fathom that there was something greater than yourself after, because you were still able to stay sober? I mean, I used like you did.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stay sober through anything. The wind blew a certain way, the wrong way. I was like, I'm
Sunrise,
getting high.
Yeah.
Did you start to believe? When did you start to believe in your sobriety?
So here's the thing: that once you start to truly get sober, you get this new perspective on life. And when I look back on my life with that new perspective, I could see God in my life. Right. Once I opened myself up to the basic concept of God, I was able to see God everywhere. So I was able to start seeing God everywhere back in my life. The gun not going off twice, not once, but twice, and then throwing it and it's discharging, had to be God. All those situations in my life where I should have been dead, put myself in trap houses, put myself in bad situations, where I get that creepy feeling in the base of my gut of my stomach that tells me to leave wherever I am and whatever I'm doing. You start to see that that's supernatural. And I chose to believe that supernatural was God. As a result of that, my spirituality grew from not having it to maybe, to a curiosity, to a seeking, to a fulfillment. And I found that the more I put God in my life, the less I wanted, thought, acted, craved, drugs, alcohol, all that stuff. I was catatonic literally for 3 months. Like I can't even begin to explain catatonic. And the love of those men who had no connection to me, like they're not family, they gave unselfishly, brought a new insight into God and into spirituality. And I don't get into my religious beliefs. I know there's a God. I have certain religious convictions, and I have certain relationships with my God that are real to me. And as a result of those men showing me what God looked like on earth, and they had that look in their eyes. See, I don't know what this is, that look. I don't know what it is, but they had it.
Yeah.
And it is contagious.
Yeah.
And, that old guy, Larry, that I was telling you about, he had nothing. I was in Michigan. The guy had a garbage bag for a window. He was crippled up with arthritis, and the cold weather affected him. He had no money. He had no nothing. But this guy had the ability to laugh from a truly joyful place on a daily basis. That kind of thing becomes infectious, right? If you want what we have, do what we do. And hanging out with those guys just became contagious. The idea, and I would vocalize my idiotic ideas like, I'm 45 days sober, and I tell Larry, hey, Larry, I finally got a job. He's like, oh man, that's great, Chris. Where's your job at? Where are you going to be working? I was like, Larry, you're going to believe this. I'm a bar back at Rooster's Bar. He's like, no, you're not. And he would hang up the phone on me, So that kind of just being around that, and you become, or I needed to be led at that point in my life, and they led me down a path of righteousness, for lack of a better term. And so I started recognizing God in the sunrises. I started recognizing God in the sunsets. I started recognizing God in all of those missing pieces of the puzzle of my life, where there was no explanations for why it turned out the way it did, but it did. So that new set of glasses that I had, that new perspective with some sobriety, allowed me to do that. And I have found that the closer and the more that I pursue that relationship, the stronger I become. And I sit here and I smirk and I laugh because I'm remarried and I have an amazing wife. I'm married to a woman that grew up in the 80s who has never seen cocaine in real life. I mean, when you want to talk about opposite to me as can get, right? So I'll never forget, when we were first married and God blessed me with her and he blessed me. I could tell you that story in a minute, but I remember when first time I got down on my knees and was praying and she caught me praying, I was ashamed. It was the weirdest thing. It's like, how could she be, how could she follow me when I'm on my knees praying to a God? But only to come and find out that she loved me for the person I was because I was on my knees praying to that God. Yeah. So, and I reflect back, I grew up in housing projects and I was always attracted to those people that had it in their eyes, and that it was their spiritual convictions. Their knowing that there was a God and had absolute faith in the fact that there was a God. Even in those adverse situations, they had an energy about them. And I was always attracted to that and I didn't know it. But my wife, here's another crazy story. My wife, and she hates when I tell this story this way. So I'm going to tell the story this way. So at some point I met my wife and like I said, she's nothing like me. And in our relationship along the way, I fell in love with her and she fell in love with me. And we bought a house together and we had plans to get married sometime in the future, but there was nothing serious. But along the way, I got really sick and didn't know what was going on. And I found out that I had stage 4 cancer. I had stage 4B cancer that had metastasized and had spread to my body. And I had to get really aggressive with the treatments and stuff like that. And I remember, I've got significant resources. So I went everywhere, all over the world to try to find a cure. And everybody kept sending me back to West Palm Beach because this is where all the old rich people are, right? And so that's where all the good doctors are. They come where the money is. And I try to keep these old rich people alive as long as I can so they can keep bilking them for money. Anyway, so I came home from, came home from the doctor that day and I had finally became, I don't want to say at peace, but accepted my fate. And my fate was, I had 3 months left to live. They told me that I was terminally ill, stage 4B, metastasized. I was done.
What year was this?
2015.
Okay.
That sounds about right. 10 years ago. Maybe 14, maybe 2014.
Okay.
So I came home and I've managed to amass some significant materialistic things. And so I came to her and she's like, what's going on, honey? You're awfully glum. And I was like, well, doctors tell me I got 3 months left to live. And she said, huh, okay. And I said, well, here's what I'm thinking. She said, what? And I said, I got all this stuff, right? I got a lot of stuff in the world. My kids have passed. I have nobody to leave it to. I'm selling her, right? I said, you love me. I love you. We get married. And this amazing woman that, I love and respect. And a little side note here, my wife had been married before and her husband was a drug addict, extremely abusive. He had literally taken her and her 3 children in the middle of Nebraska, in the middle of the freezing weather, high on crystal meth, and held her at gunpoint for like 7 hours and told her that if she got out of the truck, she was going to shoot her kids, who were his kids. It's the kind of situation she came up in. So this amazing woman that raised these 3 kids on her own by having a daycare in her house, put herself through college, climbed the corporate ladder, is now making six figures, doing an amazing job for herself, who doesn't need me, who's my best friend. In that moment when I told her that, I had 3 months left to live, and I looked at her and said, will you marry me? Without missing a beat, she looked back at me and said, I can do anything for 3 months. Now, she hates when I tell a story that way because it's an almost true story. But what actually happened in that moment, this amazing woman who's my best friend, my biggest cheerleader, she looked at me and said, Chris, if I can only be your wife for 3 months, let's get married right now. And she got screwed, dude. That was like 10 years ago. She got the brown end of that stick. You know what I mean? And we have an amazing life together. I finally have everything that I've ever wanted. She's got 3 kids who have their own struggles, but they've given us 2 beautiful grandchildren that think I'm a superhero because I'm a child in a grown man's body with a lot of money. So it's like they call me Toots, and they call me Toots because I made them toot when they were kids. When they were struggling with stomach issues. I was always the one that was able to get them to burp, get them to fart, to bring them a lot of relief. So they associate me with comfort, and so they come to me with these crazy ideas, and I'm like, let's go do it. And so I'm a super grandpa.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so it's come full circle.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. What happened with the cancer? It went into remission?
No. I spent 2 years in chemo and radiation, absolutely brutalizing my body. I used to be a professional fighter. I walk around at 225 pounds, bench pressing 425 pounds. I was a monster. And this is what's left as a result of, no hair having, and, I'm under 200 pounds and I'm not the physical person that I was. But, one of the mentors in my life, dare I say sponsors, but one of the mentors in my life, at some point in my cancer treatments, was in a hospital dying. And I had a choice to make that I would either be there by his side or take care of myself. And I decided to stop the treatments, the chemo and the radiation, to be there with him for the last 2 weeks of his life. And it was the most beautiful 2 weeks of my life. To be there when he passed. To take care of him, watch over him, make sure that his wishes were honored because he didn't want anybody to see him in a diaper crumbling and 84 years old and going away that way. And so to be able to be there to honor his wishes was the best decision I ever made. So I stopped the chemo and the radiation, which in turn turned out to be one of probably the best decisions I ever made. 7 months ago, 8 months ago, my oncologist said, Chris, cancer is going to kill you one day. You know that, right? And I said, I'm going to prove you wrong, doc. And he looked at me and said, I hope you do. Wait a minute. You're an asshole. I know you're an asshole. What do you mean by that? I said, doc, I'm going to go step in front of a bus this afternoon. The bus is going to kill me and I'll prove you wrong. He smacked me in the head and walked out of the room, So yeah, they proclaimed that cancer is going to kill me one day. And when I asked them which one, they said, well, we can't tell you. I said, exactly. Yeah. I'm here until God's done with me. And the day that he's done with me, I'm gone. And that's just a fact. So in the day that they told me that I had 3 months left to live, I decided I was going to live 3 more months and I wasn't going to die for 3 months. And here I am, 10 years later. Yeah. I'm still living and still living life and still grateful for it. And again, another thing that God allows me to use to help save people's lives.
Yeah. So I want to point something out. You would never say this publicly, but I'm going to say it. So you've had a very successful career, and you use a lot of that money to help other people who are struggling. And I see it firsthand. I've heard you announce, if anyone needs to go to treatment, come talk to me. And treatment is not cheap these days. No. I know that you provide literature for certain groups. Mm-hmm. I know that you feed people who are in need. I've witnessed it firsthand. Two questions here. First, I'm just curious, out of you're a smart guy. What did you do in your career to amass the success? Because it sounds like you did it when you were 17, blew it all up. You did it again at 20. You were getting sober, whatever. You had that catastrophe that happened, which I'm sure set you back and took you away from work for a while. What did you do this last time, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've been blessed with a lot of my start businesses from the beginning and build them into successful businesses that I exit from. I've done that several times, you know, and there's been a lot of struggles along the way, and God has been present through all of that. And I could show you God's story after God's story after God's story on how much time we have to have left. But that amazing wife that I told you about, you know, 8 years ago, some things went really desperately wrong in my business. Perfect storm. And there's a couple of stories around that, but one of the stories is this, that I've committed to giving a certain amount of money on a regular basis. And no matter what, that gets taken care of. And 1 month I didn't have the money to do it. I was nearly broke. And it's a lot of money we give away that I'm committed to giving away. And I went to her and said, I don't know what we're going to do, but those kids are counting on that money. And I would like to put it on credit cards. And without hesitation, that amazing woman looked at me and said, of course. And I put our giving on credit cards that month. And I got taken care of. One of the reasons that I give so much away, and even my business is based on not profits. My business is based on affecting the world in a positive way. And we're not a nonprofit, you know. The amazing thing is that I'm in the financial industry, and a lot of people trust me with a lot of money. But it's all God's money. Every penny in my checking account is not my money. And as a result of that, God does with it what he wants to do with it. And he allows me indulgences, and he allows me things that I probably shouldn't have. And he allows that. And as long as I'm a good steward, there's always money in my checking account to pay bills. There's always money in my checking account to take care of people. There's always money in my checking account to meet people's needs that are truly struggling and trying. And there's never a question. So at the end of the day, none of it has anything to do with me. It has everything to do with God picking a wretched man or a wretched child up and showing the great things he can do with even the worst of stock. And that is what it's all about for me. None of it's mine, Kevin. None of it, not a penny of it. And anybody that's close to me knows that's exactly the way I live my life. God wants something, he gets it. God tells me to do something, it's done. No matter what the situation looks like. And I can give you miracle after miracle in my life where I thought that it was over. And all of a sudden, money shows up again and again and again. God is real in my life. And as long as I follow his direction, I'm taken care of. You know, I always use this funny story and I mentor a lot of guys. I always use this funny story about two pigeons on a telephone wire in New York City outside of Grand Central Station. And they're looking down at the people and the insanity and the anger and the rage and the discourse in their lives. And one pigeon looks at the other and says, man, look at how miserable those people are. What the heck is that all about? And the older pigeon looks at him and says, yeah, it's really terrible. They must not have a God like us to take care of them like he takes care of us. And I use that story a lot because that's the reality. If God's going to take care of the pigeons, he sure as anything going to take care of me, who's created in his own image.
Yeah. What piece of advice would you have for the newcomer or someone who's struggling listening to this podcast right now?
90% of the people in the world have not done the things that I have done, the horrible things that I have done. And God has forgiven me. And the biggest struggle I had was with forgiving myself. And so if there's one thing that you want to know for a fact, and I know this, if you want a new drug of choice, make it gratitude. Focus on the gratitude that you have, even if it's just for this sober moment. Even if it's just a sober moment, be grateful for that. And you'll be amazed at how your perspective has changed. I was the consummate victim. I'll never forget that old man that I was telling you about, Larry. I'll never forget. I'm probably 3 years sober. Oh, no, couldn't have been. I was in my first year of sobriety because I had just come off a relapse. And I sit there and I'm telling him, oh, Larry, I got locked in the trunk as a kid and all these terrible things that my mother did and shot and all this stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, Chris, that is so terrible. I didn't know that happened this week. I said, no, Larry, it didn't happen this week. It happened 15 years ago. And he looked at me and said, that's right. Stop using it as an excuse. At some point, you have to be responsible for your decisions. Are you going to get sober or are you going to live in that for the rest of your life? Are you going to continue to let those people have power over you? So in that moment, I stopped becoming a victim and started realizing that I'm a result of my decisions and I needed to start making better ones. Focus on gratitude, see where you can help in this world, and stop being a victim, and your life will change.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your willingness to get vulnerable just to help someone else.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.